you took over. It's like, I lost all ability to have control here. Okay, so we are doing the carryover or carry forward, used interchangeably, those two terms. It is known as also carryover, and it refers to the process that allows unspent and unobligated funds remaining at the end of the budget period to be moved forward into the next budget period. And so when Tammy presented yesterday on award management and the NOA, and they talked about SNAP and non-SNAP, this is what that's related to, and you would not need it for carryover for SNAP awards, but for non-SNAP you do. And so, or it could be yes. And so when carryover is allowed, grantees are able to utilize the unexpended funds for prior years during the current period. These funds can be used to cover allowable costs in the subsequent budget period. So it's always related to the proposed award, the proposed budget, and the allowable costs remain in the budget period following. The carryover rules apply to both direct awards and subawards, such as those from NIH or NIH flow through to M. And there are three types of carry forward. There's automatic, which is what we're saying you don't need to request the carryover of those funds. There's prohibited, meaning you cannot do it at all. And then there's restricted. The carry forward status is specific to the notice of award. It will always let you know what you can do, and it can fall into one of these three categories. And it is important to not make assumptions about which state applies. Always refer to the NOA. So I do break down those three. So the automatic unspent funds can remain in the budget and may be used in subsequent budget periods. There's no action required by the PI to continue using those funds. When it's prohibited, unspent funds are forfeited at the end of each budget period and cannot be utilized in subsequent budget periods. And when it's restricted, any use of the unspent funds requires prior approval from the sponsor to use in some subsequent budget periods. Key considerations to think about. RAS is our organization. That would be your equivalent to Kamar's probably team. And we provide the PI with regular updated forward reports. That's our financial reports that Kim showed yesterday in those meetings. And we confirm the projected costs for the remaining months of the budget period. The forecast of the estimate unobligated balances should include all planned costs, not limited to any salaries, any fringe or benefit costs, subawards, equipment, tuition, and any adjustments that you know you're going to need to make to salaries or anything like that. You can include all of those in the forecast. At the time of the RPPR, the PI and RAS can determine if there could be more than 25%. We just talked about that at the time of the RPPR of the total approved budget and estimate what the unobligated balance is. If it's greater than 25%, as Robert just mentioned, the PI must provide justification to the sponsoring agency. Federal agencies, including NIH, are required by uniform guidance to close fixed year appropriation costs and cancel any remaining balances by September 30th of the fifth fiscal year after the year of availability. Now, I put that there because I particularly had a PI that had been given 5 years of funding. It was at the start of COVID. So could not spend those funds in the first year. And then got a no-cost extension. They had granted the no-cost extension, but at the end of the fifth year, the first year funds expired. So we lost a big chunk of money, not knowing this rule existed. Normally, it doesn't come into play because you're spending the funds that you're asking for carryover. She got approved the carryover to use the funds, but she didn't use them by the fifth year. So the award was deobligated by the amount of the first year funds. So that's a key indicator. Again, I didn't know that this was at play. So I'm gonna turn off my Zoom. I don't know how, but hopefully that doesn't keep coming up. But I didn't know that that rule was in existence. And it just so happened that that's happened. So that can happen now and could see more often as well. But it's kind of the COVID experience, right? We're now in the 6th year after, and last year would have been the 5th year, and that's when the funds expired. Okay, and so what are the submission requirements for carry forward? You have to request the sponsor prior approval, as Robert just mentioned. Carry forward, internal submission starts with the Compass grant form. So when we showed you Compass yesterday, we actually submit the information on that form in our system, and we upload all required documents. And so the request should be submitted on institutional letterhead, so formal letterhead, and it needs to be signed with a scientific justification for the need to carry over the funds into the next budget period by the PI. The carryover means the recipient has an immediate bona fide need for additional funds. I have seen carryover request funds be denied because the sponsor says you already have money. You already getting this next year of funding, so you don't need that money yet. You can request the carryover when you need it. And then the unobligated amount being requested must be available if NIH prior period FFR must already be submitted and accepted. So what that means is you're gonna, if in the event the carryover is not automatic, you're gonna submit an annual invoice to NIH. That FFR has to be submitted to NIH, and they have to accept that FFR in ERA Commons before you can request carryover. Sufficient time remaining in the current budget period for the carryover request has to be reviewed and spent. The general rule is 90 days around the budget end period, but usually you're already in the next budget period when you request those funds. So need in terms of funding, generally 75% or more of the current budget period has to be exhausted, and carryover requests requested too early could result in an offset to the next budget period. Some carry-forward requests are more complex, requiring sponsor-specific templates and portal submissions. So there could be a specific portal you have to request it in. But that's usually different agencies. NIH is generally you're submitting that by OSP to the agency directly. If the NOA says that there's a different condition that must be met or requirement, then you can refer to the terms conditions of the NOA. And this is just our internal thing. So again, we talked about our grant form having workflow attached. So a PI will approve in the system, our RAS approves in the system, and then OSP or RGC approves in the system. It could be pushed back, denied if there's a discrepancy on the documentation or the figures provided. So what is an offset? Because that's like the question, if they could offset those funds, yes. Unspent funds from the prior period are used to partially pay or offset new funds awarded in the current year. NOA, the prior funds replace new funds on the award. And the offset reduces the total amount of funds obligated to date. So your agreement will say, we've granted you 500K today, and the offset will reduce in between those years. So it could be an offset of one of the years to 400K. And here's an example here. So if the PI is entering year 3 of an NIH award, for each year of the award, they were anticipating estimate to receive the $100,000 budget, but they had unspent balance of $43,000 in year 1. The GMS and PO are concerned with the progress and plans for spending, so they chose to offset the funding in year 3 of the award. Year 3 NOA comes in and the awards 100K in new funds and offsets the remaining 43K from year 1 to the 57K in new funds. So the PI still has the 100K in year 3, but the total authorized funding is now 257 and not 3K. All right, so then this is talking about the ERA Commons submission requirements. Again, we talked about the official letter that's signed requesting permission to carry forward on the department letterhead. And it includes the total amount being requested and a brief explanation of the unobligated balance. This also includes a detailed budget, and we use the PHS 398 budget with the F&A checklist to submit the breakdown of costs that we're carrying over. So you may have initially had salaries, equipment, supplies, participants on your original proposed budget, and you've been spending salary, you didn't buy the equipment, and you also think I need to purchase that in year 3 versus year 1. You can request that specifically in your detailed budget. And then again, your justification it goes along with your budget, which provides the scientific need for each budget category and why you need those carryover funds. If a subaward or subcontract is budgeted, in the budget is included, RGC needs to receive a separate detailed budget from the sub to include into the carryover request. So if your carryover request includes you want to carry over funds to the sub, that also has to be included in the carryover request as a separate budget. And then once the new budget segment is released, typically the GMLMS will not entertain the carryover request until the unexpended balance shows immediate need, as referenced in the prior slide. And that was what I mentioned about them saying you don't need it yet because you got this money coming right now. And this just shows you in our ERA comments, the prior approval initiate request. RAS, we don't put this in. Our OSP or RGC office goes in and does this request. But this is the prior approval request and comments. You would select the award and you would select the specific budget year that you're requesting the carryover request in. And the requirement of separate specific attachment is a sponsor requirement. So in this case, I specifically said what the attachment should be, and that's the whole carryover request package to NIH. So what are best practices? Any thoughts around that? I mean, we can go through this. I think it's important to make sure, obviously, you're monitoring the expenses throughout the award. But your amount requested should be equal to or less than the amount filled out on your FSR as the unexpected balance. So again, you're always referencing the FSR that was submitted and accepted. The final year carryover is not required in order to use the unobligated funds from that final year into an approved no-cost extension. So if you get to year 5 of the award, you just want to request a no-cost extension, you don't have to do both, a carryover request and a no-cost extension. You're just extending the last period. Verifying the current posted expenses encompass. So that's our reconciliation of current up-to-date awards, meaning they match the general ledger. And that's what we report as the unobligated balance. And no change in the prior year posted expenses that need reviewed or reconciliation. So once you submit a carryover request, if you have to go back and adjust a prior year, that changes your unobligated balance. So it's just to keep in mind to be careful about making adjustments to prior year, especially when carryover requests are involved. You need to ensure that the FSR budget reduction of prior year has already occurred. So if there is a budget reduction of the prior year, keep that in mind when requesting your carryover, and always refer to the total authorized funding to the institution. Agencies tend to round carryover approvals to the whole dollar. I advise my faculty to put cents on their carryover request. Just that gives us a true accounting of what the money is that's available. But if they decide, yeah, you gave us a budget with cents, but we're gonna round it up, that's totally fine too. So then review carryover document for consistency before the submission. It's important for the documents to be consistent, because that's also could lead to the carryover being denied if the budget and the justification don't match, or if the scientific justification is not adequate for NIH's needs. Only our institutional authorized agents or office, which is RGC, can enter the budget entry type of the carryover request. That's something internal. But basically, they're entering the budget decrease once carryover is approved. They'll go in and reduce the prior year budgets and add the carryover approved budget to a new project year. And so that's important to note too, in terms of your financial systems and then budgeting. You will need to make sure that those years align with what's been authorized in terms of the budget for that period. The initial carryover request prior to submitting a prior year FFR will typically result in extending a delay or denial by NIH or by the GMS. So again, it was important to wait till your FFR is submitted and accepted. Typically, you cannot request carryover on restricted supplements. So we've had supplement, you can get a restricted supplement of funding. It could be a diversity supplement, although that's something new that we are not seeing now from NIH, but in the past, that was an example of a restricted supplement. If sponsors approve carryover via email or informal non-NOA directly to the PI, which we have seen as well, we'll be sure to make sure we update that communication from the sponsor into our files before we allow the funding to be noted in our system. So these are the responses, obviously, from the sponsor. If it's approved, then the PI and RGC are notified in ERA Commons. That's the typical way that we get notified, is in ERA Commons. And they will issue a new NOA, which has the carryover approval. It doesn't give us an increased budget. It's just saying we approve you to use these funds in the new budget period. RGC adjusts the budget, which I just mentioned, in our system that includes approved carryover funding in the correct period. And then we, RAS, update the budget amounts, make sure that the updated budget amounts are reflected in Compass and all fours. That's important because what we found is if they don't accurately align in the system, when we go to run the final FFR, then our total obligated funds in our system don't match PMS. And that's important to know. And that's a part of our reconciliation, which we'll talk about when we talk about award reconciliation. If denied, the PI and RGC are notified in ERA Commons as well. RGC reviews and ensures the unexpended budget was reduced, because if they deny carryover, that means your funding is deobligated. So they'll reduce the budget to match the applicable budget period in Compass, and then Compass, as the funds remain restricted for use. So if they come back and say, nope, your carryover is denied, and in that budget period, you had 200K that was awarded to you and you requested 50 of that to be carried over, and they said no, now your budget in that year two is no longer 200K, it's 150. So it's de-obligated back down. And then RAS confirms that the updated budget amounts are reflected in Compass. Same. And I think that is, yep, that's the last slide. Any questions?
So I know from the system that will not happen, but I just want to ask, have you had in your experience or what can be done if, for instance, someone asks for carryover and is saying carryover $2, but from his projected analysis, but in a real sense, what was left was $1.8.
Yeah.
Has that ever happened?
We checked to make sure what's being asked is in the system on the general ledger before we submit the documentation. And then RGC is going to check again to make sure nothing has changed since the time you submitted the request.
Yeah, because that would be important. Because
yes.
You may be asking for something that is not there again.
Correct.
Because but the beauty about that is, like you said, that you ask for carryover after 90 days.
After, yeah.
That would be better because if you ask early, you may.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. Mm-hmm. Any questions, Kamar? Comments?
No question.
Okay.